we will reduce excessive numbers of foreign students studying at metropolitan universities to relieve stress on rental markets in our major cities. We will work with universities to put in place a cap on foreign students. It's not just housing. People know that if you move suburbs, it's hard to get your kids into school or into childcare. It's hard to get into a GP because the doctors have closed their books. It's hard to get elective surgery. These factors have all contributed to capacity constraints because of the lack of planning in the migration program.
For some time, the federal opposition has been pretty clear about its views on migration numbers and about the impact of international students on boosting them.
This is the modern version of boat arrivals.
Peter Dutton made cutting international students and permanent migrant arrivals a feature of his speech in reply to the budget in May. He proposed a 25% cut for 2 years, from 185,000 people to 140,000. His shadow treasurer has taken an even harder line, saying the coalition would not just cut back the permanent migration program by 25%, but the much larger Net Overseas Migration Program, or NOM, which includes temporary arrivals.
We've said over the coming years we'll achieve a 25% reduction in the NOM versus what Labor has.
I think that was the permanent migration number.
And the NOM, and so that's a reasonable number for, we think, to achieve.
So just to confirm, you're saying a 25% cut in the net overseas migration rate.
That's right.
The hardline comments make the coalition's decision yesterday to not support the government's caps on international student numbers a little strange, even to some of its most ardent media supporters.
This one took me by surprise. What about you?
I reckon it's taken most of the country by surprise. I don't think anyone ever thought in their life they would see Peter Dutton get into bed with the Greens on immigration.
I've got messages already from people saying, what the hell, I thought Peter Dutton wanted to win the election. Another one says here, overseas students will come to study and then they want to stay and they take jobs from Australians. So that's what he's up against.
The opposition says the problem isn't caps on student numbers, but Labor's specific plan for blanket caps that was wrong. The government's proposal has certainly faced an avalanche of criticism from the university sector.
We were implacably opposed to a cap, full stop, because it was just a blunt instrument with no consideration for individual circumstances.
Education Minister Jason Clare says that with the legislation doomed, the government will continue to try to reduce student numbers using what is known as Ministerial Direction 107.
Ministerial direction gives a direction to decision makers, people who are making decisions in the Department of Home Affairs on student visas, on the order of processing. So certain types of student visa applications will be processed ahead of other types. It doesn't establish a limit on how many visa grants take place or how many visas are processed.
Whether the coalition wants to embarrass the government politically or has serious concerns with the government's legislation, the opposition, just 5 months from the next federal election, still hasn't said how it will achieve its much more aggressive cuts in migration numbers. Cutting permanent migration rather than net overseas migration would not necessarily ease housing demand, as most people who are granted permanent migration status are already living here.
We've said that we'll reduce the permanent program by 25%, and we will do that because I want to create housing for Australians at the moment who can't afford housing.
According to former Immigration Department Deputy Secretary Abul Rizvi, a big cut in permanent migration may also be illegal.
I think what it's saying is in many ways what the Howard government was trying to do in 1996. It wants to cut permanent migration, and in particular, it wants to cut family migration. Family migration is dominated by partners and dependent children. The Migration Act makes it very clear the government must process those applications on a demand-driven basis.
While many Australians would like to see migration numbers cut to help ease the housing crisis, cutting migration has other economic ramifications.
Right now their economic strategy seems to be a migration strategy because that's the only thing propping up the economy. So is that the view of this government? I mean, that's it. Without that, we're going backwards.
But that raises the obvious question. Is the coalition prepared to see the economy go into recession if it cuts migration? A study by the Grattan Institute earlier this year found that cutting migration might make rent a little more affordable over the next decade, but would cost federal and state governments up to $211 billion in lost revenue over the next 30 years. Just how the number of international student visas should be set in future is an issue that hasn't really been addressed by either side of politics.
The key issue was that they were wrapping up international education and student numbers into a shameless migration debate. And when that didn't suit, they then wrapped us up in a cost of living crisis, a housing shortage, the rents going up. International students were being blamed for any number of things. When what we really need to have is a discussion about what is the right shape and size of Australia's international education market.
In my view, one thing it could very readily do, and it would control both numbers and target quality better, is to apply the same sort of system that we apply to domestic students, similar to an ATAR. All people coming to Australia, young people, will have sat a university entrance exam in their home country and they'll have got a result. We can start targeting those students who score better than those students who score poorly.